it's time for our featured speaker. This is Michael Stocker, and he's the co-founder of the Ocean Conservation Research. His presentation is What Was the Sound? An Introduction to Marine Bioacoustics. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I have a very kind of arcane job, and people are starting to get to know what it is, but I've been working it for 30 years here. I'm a marine bioacoustician, and that means that I work in sound and sound perception of humans and other animals, but mostly other animals in the ocean. And we're looking at the impact of human-generated noise pollution on. There's a waiting room guy. Okay, on the impacts of that on marine life. And I like a number of years ago, I gave a presentation at the Oakland Museum, and I was introduced as a biocrustacean. That worked out really well for me. So, anyways, the ocean is an acoustical environment because when there's a lot of life in the ocean, phytoplankton and zooplankton, whatever, you can't really see that far, and then also at nighttime it's dark. So animals that still have eyes that they use to gather light in their various conditions have very complex adaptations to sound. And it's amazing that water, because it's not really compressible, transmits sound really effectively. So you can actually make a sound in the ocean that you can hear 2,000 miles away. And if you made a sound in San Francisco that you could hear up in Seattle, you would have some explaining to do. But it doesn't take that much energy to make that kind of propagation. In fact, there are whales, particularly the great whales that have these really low frequency infrasonic noises that they make. You can hear them across the curvature of the earth, and 3,000-4,000 miles away. And nature is not wasteful, elegant but not wasteful. And so there's some reason why these animals are able to hear or communicate, if you will, across these long distances. With the great whales, we can only really speculate what that is about. But one would think that these are community animals who have reasons to stick together or not necessarily feed in tight groups because they eat a lot, that they communicate over those long distances. And they might be stating things like the conditions of where they are, so that the other animals, conspecifics, can hear what's going on 3,000 miles away and figure out whether it's worthwhile going there or not. And there's another component of this, which I'll get into a little bit later, having to do with the ability of these animals to essentially echolocate. We all know that bats and dolphins use biosonar, that they echolocate off of objects around them in the near field, and they use high frequency sounds, which gives them a really incredible sense of detail in terms of what they can perceive. In fact, Phacina, which are the harbor porpoises, are one of the highest frequency phonating animals, and also hearing, of course, because they phonate up 200 kilohertz. They can resolve obstacles that are the width of a human hair at high speed. So these animals have very high resolution. Well, one of the things that it's conjectural at this point in time, is that the great whales, the blue whales and the humpback whales and whatever, that they do the same thing, except in long wavelength, low frequency sounds. So, for example, if there's a guy, Christopher Clark, who's been around for a long time, as one of the kind of the grand uncles of marine animal bioacoustics, but he at Cornell, he conjectured that whales were using this as a navigation cue, because if you take humpback whales, for example, up in the Gulf of Alaska that need to end up down in Hawaii, they don't do a straight shot to Hawaii. They go over to the seamount over here. They go down to this channel here, this little ridge line. So they seem to be somehow orienting towards geological features in the ocean. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, there's no way you can really verify this in the lab because these animals are large, the wavelengths are large, and you're not going to be able to do what they call operant conditioning testing on these animals, where you would say, when you hear this sound, press the paddle and we'll feed you 4 tons of krill. It doesn't quite work that way. So in any event, he's done a lot of presentations on this stuff, but it's something that really defies, unfortunately, lab verification, or maybe fortunately. So anyways, that's kind of a preamble about how sound works in the ocean. Let me see if I can get this up here. Let's see here. I'm supposed to be able to, oh, there we go. Okay. So we're going to go over these various critters and how they use sounds in the ocean. And this is a little guessing game called What Was That Sound? And maybe I should open up the chat. Let's see here. Open up the chat. Let's see. Okay.
Should be at the bottom.
No, I got it here, but it's in the middle. Okay. So I'm going to play some sounds, and I'm going to, just give you a second or two to guess what the heck the sound is. Let me know if you can hear it. Can you hear that?
Yes.
So what do you think that is? Oh, Tom already got it. Tom and Elm, you guys are smart. Okay. This is an interesting animal. They have this large claw, which they snap, and the noise that comes out of that is so, first off, they do it so fast that that little bubble you see there is a cavitation bubble, and it pops and creates that sound, but it's got so much energy in it that it basically stuns their prey. And they can stun actually significantly large prey with this thing. And then it's like they call them pistol shrimp as well. But they're kind of ubiquitous in the ocean, all the way up to about 30 degrees. Excuse me. Yeah, it would be up to about 65 or 70 degrees north and south latitudes. But you hear them everywhere. And there's a component of this where people feel that, for example, fish swimming around at night, they have eyes, but how do they actually see when it's dark? And there was a guy, John Potter, who worked on this a little bit. And when this snaps set out, they are completely stochastic noise. But when they hit a boundary, whether it's coral or another animal, whatever, all of a sudden it creates a wavefront that is coherent. So it's a coherent wavefront. And his belief was that fish were able to resolve that coherent wavefront, and he called it acoustical daylight. And it's the same thing with the sun or the moon. It sheds its light down and it's completely chaotic and random until it hits something that ends up making it coherent. So this is the same type of idea behind that. And he was able to, it wasn't just he was able to resolve that. And he was hired by the Malaysian Navy to come up with a way of using that sound to resolve images underwater, which he did effectively. So anyways, that's a short little story on a long little animal, or a long story on a short little animal. Any guesses here what this might be? Got bafflement. Your dog wants to know. That's great. This is a mantis shrimp. There's a lot of species of these animals. These are the larger ones here. They are known for having very complex visual systems. They have 9 different cone frequencies. So they actually see everything from infrared to ultraviolet. They're shallow water, meaning that they're probably no deeper than about 20 meters. This particular species here is about maybe 60 centimeters long, and they get smaller. They get down to the size of your thumb. But these are animals that burrow together. They find their breeding partner, and they burrow, and they will live together for 20 years. And every year, they will go through a breeding cycle. And those are a male and a female, who are purring to each other. And the burrows are complex, and they're obviously stuck there. I mean, the guy's not going to sport around. He's not going, I'm going to go out to have a cigarette, It's not going to, they're in it for life. And it's really a beautiful thing that this is probably one of the most fidelitous animals in the animal kingdom. Okay, next sound. Yeah, parrotfish. That's interesting. Well, that's interesting because this is a grinding sound. But what this happens to be is a spiny lobster. And lobsters have these antennae, and then they have these pads kind of above their carapace, and they grind these, and it's like crickets. They essentially have the same type of thing, where they have the antenna, which will serve as a plectrum for this other kind of comb-shaped thing, and that's the sound that they make. And they're mysterious animals too. Let's see what we got here. Well, there's a lot of critters in there. That's actually a healthy reef. Oops. Let's get back here. That's a healthy reef. So you hear all sorts of nice animals, and snapping shrimp, of course, in the background. Snapping shrimp are really the bane of bioacousticians, because you can rarely record a sound of an individual fish or anything without having this crackle in the background. So, and this one was given away, but this has got a nice story behind it. As you saw, this was midshipping, and these are really interesting animals. Hey, buddy. Here we go. They're about 6 inches long. They're intertidal animals, at least during their breeding phase are intertidal, but we find them down literally at 1,000 meters when they're not breeding. So they have a really wide range of habitats that they occupy. But in their breeding period, they hum, and that was actually 2 males humming to a female. The interesting part about this is it's hard to say if they're competitive. How does the female, when we talk about behaviors from a Darwinian standpoint, we always talk about it in terms of a breeding competition, a territorial announcement, other types of things like this. You have 2 males who are essentially courting this female, but she'll breed with one of them, and then he will take the eggs that she lays and guard them, and then she'll go sporting off with the other guy. So the idea of breeding fitness announcement is kind of betrayed by this, but these animals make this sound and maybe gets them excited. The first time we heard about this in the news was in the mid-'80s, and in Sausalito, when the anchor outs were really happening there, they had a huge inflorescence of these things at one point in time, and people were hearing it through the hull of their boats, and it was driving them crazy. People were saying it's space aliens, the U.S. Navy, all kinds of other things. But Peter Fulkens, who was at the time down at Cal Academy, identified this to being this little fish, this humble little fish. And the next thing, yeah, this is getting more cryptic and ambiguous, but much in the fashion that that these animals, while they do have reasonably intimate contact, there are many fish that basically are gamete dispersal fish, and these are croakers. They're croaking away. and they, as a school, will pulse to these croaks, and all of a sudden, at some point in time, the males will kick out the milt, and the females will kick out the egg, and will just cast it. And so you never know who's dad and who's mom or whatever. This is the way these guys breed. So we're talking about a schooling animal that breeding competition is not one of their behavioral paradigms here. And we have, here's another. I love this. They have a word in Spanish, which is basically carcajada. It's a sinister laugh, and that's what this guy is doing. You could call it grunting, but the sound production mechanism of these animals, and a lot of teleost fish, have these essentially raspers on their tongue and raspers in the top of their mouths, and they move their tongue across, and that's how they make the sounds they're creating. And what do they do? I mean, obviously there's some complex signaling going on there. What are they saying? And I was just listening to it, I couldn't identify them from sound, and I wasn't able to see them, but there's two birds early yesterday morning, and they could have been warblers, but one would start, and then the other would kind of respond, and this went on for like a half hour at least, in different cadences, but they never overlapped each other. They always interlocked with each other. So maybe the barred grunt has the same type of thing, where they're creating a sound environment which excites them, says something about what their habitat is. Okay. Oh, Tom, again, you must be, are you a biologist, Tom? He's laughing. Let me hear you laugh. You're muted. I want to hear you guys laugh.
Two biologists.
It was Ellen really who got these, but yeah, we're both biologists.
Okay. And what type of biology you guys do? You're muted still.
I'm a botanist.
And I'm a zoologist, but I have done some marine biology.
Okay, great. Oh, good. It's always nice to have that around. Okay, that's another one of these silver Bardiella, silver perch, same like the croakers. They're essentially gamete dispersal animals. And what do we have next coming up here? Oh, here we go. That's a big mystery. I'm going to play it again because it sounds cool. So we have these Arctic seals. This happens to be a southern hemisphere, the wet-all seal. And they are in certain times of the year where it's pretty dark. So that when the Arctic seals, both the Antarctic and Arctic seals, they have very complex phonations that they do. And we call them phonations. This is an ISO standard right now, because they don't have vocal cords per se. So we call them phonations. And is this what I think it is? Oh. Yeah, that's definitely good. Somebody at least guess that, unless you're ready to move on to the next thing. It is a whale. It's definitely a whale. And what sort of whale it is a minke whale. These are the smallest of the rorqual family. The minke, the Brutish whale, the sea whale, the sea whale, the fin whale, and the blue whale. And the blue whale is the largest critter that we've known living on the planet so far. The minke whales are, 5 to 7 meters. They're pretty small. They have some complex phonations that they do, and because they're small, they seem to do it in a range that humans can actually hear, as opposed to the blue whales that are phonating at, anywhere from 4 to 22 hertz. But and they call that, strangely enough, somebody captured it and calls it the Star Wars sound. What do we have here? This was what the old sailors used to call the carpenter fish, as you can imagine why. Sounds like a bunch of journeymen on Monday morning working on a housing development, at least back before they had air pressurized nail guns. And these are the sperm whales. The sperm whales are vying for being one of the more acoustically complex animals with the beluga whales. So the belugas and the sperm whales are probably more acoustically complex than even humans are. And I could get into it for ages, but they have they're community animals, and they get together and they, they knock around with each other like that. And they also have biosonar, which is very complicated. Their spermaceti organ in their the melon that they have there is incredibly complex. It has lenses, acoustical lenses through it, and they can cool it off and heat it up. And this is why the sperm whale oil was so cherished, is because it has a negative heat coefficient, which means that when it gets warmer, unlike most oils, they get thinner. That oil gets thicker, so it made a very good industrial lubricant. Because something gets thicker as it gets more worked, it sticks to the things that are heating up as opposed to kind of dissipating. So that was one of the reasons why they almost killed them to oblivion back in the whaling years. Any guesses to this one? Yeah. Close. Orca, yeah. This is a beluga whale, and this is the other more complex animal. The clicks that you hear are bio-sonar clicks, and the squealing are social sounds. And that was a hunting group of about 20 of these guys, and they are communicating very complex hunting strategies to each other while they're essentially shining the light on their surroundings. That little melon on the top of their head, you typically see it. If you look at the one in the front, it's fairly large, but if you look at the ones behind, it's small. It's kind of tapered, and they can expand and contract that at mind-blowing speeds. And what that does is essentially modulate the focus of their sonar, among other things. I'm sure it does other stuff too, but it's this I think is probably the most complex, acoustically complex animal on the planet. And they don't necessarily have the type of language that you and I have, but they and eavesdrop in each other. So one of them can actually spotlight a fish, and the other one can go grab it. So they somehow can do time domain sync of their signals underwater, and they live. The ones that I've seen live up in the Cook Inlet area, which is pretty turbid waters. They have a 23-foot tidal swing up there, and it gets really messy. And these animals are adept at figuring out where the heck they are. Okay. Let's see. This is the adaptation thing. Sound navigation and ranging is what sonar is. This is a beaked whale. A beaked whale really was off people's sonar until probably around 2000, when in the midst of the hearings that we were having about Navy low frequency active sonar, there was a catastrophic stranding in the Bahamas, and there were 17 beak whales and one minke whale that washed up after that. And we realized that it was really as a consequence of them being deafened by the sonar, but it took years to kind of figure out what was going on. These animals are very deep diving. They'll go down, they'll go down, 2,000 meters to get squid, which is what they eat. But they're down there. The physiology of that is pretty amazing. This Cuvier beaked whale here has got a lung capacity of about 32 liters. And when it dives down to that depth, that compresses down to about 2 liters because there's a lot of pressure down there. And when it doesn't just compress in their lungs, it compresses through all these different parts of their body. They need oxygen for their muscles to work, their organs to work, and whatever. And what we've figured out happened when the Navy was doing their exercises down there, they had this very nasty sonar that they played, and these animals panicked. And because they're down deep, they needed to get up to the surface as fast as possible because they want to make sure they could breathe. In the process of which, it was really a major case of the bends, where all those little the oxygen and nitrogen, whatever that was distributed throughout their body, ended up expanding and giving them gas emboli. So by the time they got to the surface, they looked like milkshakes inside. Total mess. And that's really what put noise pollution on the map in terms of a public issue. And okay, this is the thing I was talking about before in terms of what are these animals. This is a blue whale times 10, so you can hear it, but it would go down. I mean, the lowest frequency is about 4 hertz, which we wouldn't be able to hear. Hold it, what happened here? There we go. This is what I was talking about. These are blue whale calls that are sensed on across the Pacific, and we're talking about thousands of miles away over the curvature of the Earth. So they basically get down into what's called an isothermic sound channel. They call it the SOFAR channel, and they make these sounds, and they can communicate these long distances here. More belugas. Okay, I love that. Group cohesion. I think all of us are probably, at least what I saw, it looks like we're all of the ripe old age that remember Roger Payne's Songs of the Humpback Whale. Great album. It was the first gold album by Animal. And it really, kicked off this conservation movement where people realized that these whales weren't just bags of meat that needed to be harvested and ground into money, but they were actually sentient, and they had beautiful songs, and that they were worth preserving. And it really, his album did a lot to really kick the Save the Whale environmental movement into gear. Unfortunately, we lost Roger about 3 weeks ago. We're all going to go, but he left his mark, and this was one of the recordings, part of one of the recordings. Oh, you saw Roger talk. Great, lucky you. Yeah, I met him. He was a real sweet guy, and really imaginative and a lot of fun. And this is another mystery because, again, if you're looking at things from the kind of this standard Darwinian survival paradigm, that animals will create demonstrations of breeding fitness, for example. But in breeding season, all the males, all of them, sing the same song in one breeding clade. So, and they also, again, they're not sexually fidelitous. A female might breed with 2 or 3 different males over the course of the breeding period. So they don't really have that kind of territorial breeding fitnessy type of thing. The songs change from season to season, from year to year, but they maintain integrity of the song in the various breeding clades for the various years. But one of the things that they realized a number of years ago is that elements of songs move from west to east. So they at least that's what the evidence shows right now. They might go the other way as well, but they seems to that certain codas and things like that will move from one breeding clade to another. And why? What's the top of the charts this year? It's hard to say. Another one of these Arctic seals. So you notice there's no snapping shrimp in here. Oh, I like that return. Yeah, there's no snapping shrimp in here. These are Arctic seals, and if you drop a hydrophone off the lead ice up in the Arctic in April or May, that's one of the things you'll hear. A lot of it. It's wild. And if you go to our website, you'll find a lot of these sounds in the sound library you can play around with. Minkies. I don't think do I have a sound on here? I think let me move this thing. No sound here. That was that boing sound we heard earlier. Oh, this is a great one. Hopefully this works. These are minkies as well. And what you're going to see here is you're going to see this pulsing of a single minky. And then at this point here, you'll see a second minky coming in, and they're synchronized together. But I did a paper on this. They're synchronized together, but you're going to hear the gung, 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 gung. And the difference between their pulses is the difference between their distance between where they are and the hydrophone is. And the paper I was able to do, which essentially tried to substantiate the idea that these animals are chorusing like crickets, had to do with the fact that they synchronize with each other. And I could go on this on this issue all night long, but I'm going to play it and hopefully. Minky 1, Minky 2, and 1. So crickets are interesting representation of this, that they synchronize. And you think about how do they synchronize? These animals are like, anywhere from a meter to 10 meters away from each other. How do they synchronize? Because they're making the same sound everybody else is making. They would deafen themselves to whatever's happening outside of their crick. But what ends up happening, do I have this as my next slide? Nope, I don't. They have a neurological blanking that blanks when they pulse or when they crick. And so when everything is going well for the cricket, it can't hear itself. And so what it does, it aims for a negative target. If there's anything outside of its crick, they know they're out of sync. So they basically sync up with everybody and it's all silent when they're all cricking away and everything's cool. But so why do they do this? Well, they're all synchronized and moving, and everything is fine. And all of a sudden I come into the backyard and the ones that closest to me will slow down a little bit, and all the rest of them will go, oh, something's going on over there. So it's a community ear. And this is something that is we've known since the beginning of our relationship with these crickets, is that when the crickets shut up, something's around. It could be a predator or whatever. So we're kind of on high alert when the crickets are quiet. And so this may be a similar type of thing that's happening with the minkies, that they managed to scream at the same time her daughters were screaming. My ear bones would separate and I would not know her daughters. Oh, I hear her daughters. Yeah, but you don't have neurological blanking. And her daughters would probably say, oh, what's Auntie doing? Anyway, so some other interesting sounds here. This is those are actually walruses, and there are snapping shrimp in that, which is interesting. And now we have the dulcet strains of human-generated noise. Okay, I'm done with that already. That's actually not the right sound for that. That's more the workboat, not the high-speed boat. So the ocean is now 10 times louder than it was just 50 years ago because of shipping and transoceanic shipping. So those are some of the delightful sounds we're putting in the sea. And this is where the shipping lanes are. This really started kicking up in the 60s when we started doing a lot of international trade, transoceanic trade and stuff. When it kind of synchronized with the Rust Belt thing, when all the steel factories were being shut down because their environmental impact was too great. And so, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, you hear this pretty much everywhere. And what do we have here? Yeah. I'm not going to guess these guys. This and it sounds a lot like that in a lot of places. And this is another one that we were working on for a long time. Where I'm working on offshore wind right now, but this doesn't mean this is stopped. This is an air gun, and you can hear these pretty much thousands of miles away. This is a small one. This is only a 14 cubic inch air gun. This is a loud one. I don't know what size this was, but it's. So looking for oil and gas, they have these long arrays of air guns and streamers that have hydrophones on it, and they can kick this pulse out that penetrates down up to 10 kilometers into the substrate. And when it comes back, they can read, the condition of various oil and gas reservoirs or deposits. I'm not going to call it reservoirs, call it deposits. And they're doing this all over the world. So this is an old piece, but this is where they're doing it. If you notice, they're not doing it on the Pacific seaboard here, and not in the United States along the Atlantic. And we were involved in a project when the Trump administration came in. They wanted to open up all four coasts. In the Gulf of Mexico, they have these things going on. That's kind of a sacrifice zone, but they wanted to start doing seismic surveys all across the top here and all four coasts. And we managed to stick put sticks in the wheels. We stopped it, and I'm happy. I was working with Oceana, Southern Environmental Law Center, and North Carolina Surfrider, and we managed to turn seismic surveys into ballot box poison, and we ended up prevailing on that. I'm pleased to say. Here's what this is small, because I was up in the Cook Inlet in 2019, and we were following a Hill Corp survey, and the boat was like 4 times that big, and we would put instruments in the water and recording and stuff like that. It was an interesting job. This is what they were getting ready. This is PGS, and they put this together because they were so sure they were going to get the job on the South Atlantic, and now this guy's just sitting in port, collecting dust. Ha ha. Sorry. More oil and gas stuff. These are some of the propellers they're talking about. One of the things about oil and gas, which most people don't know about, is when you're doing this deep sea extraction, you can't just pull the garbage up that they have in the deposits and ship it off. There's sand and brine, oil, gas, is multi-state. So they have these seafloor processing equipment that basically do separate the gases and the liquids and whatever, and they do that to and then they pump this multi-phase stuff back into the deposits to kind of pump it up. But when you're operating under 20,000 psi, it's not a formula for quiet, particularly with multi-phase stuff. So these are very noisy operations. Just to give you an idea of the size of them, see these 3 little guys over here. So this is equipment they put on the seafloor, and this is a seafloor separator. See the tank here, and this is a multi-phase pump, and then of course they have to communicate to each other, so they have these beautiful sounding communication signals. And we're working right now to try to get some standards on this stuff, because there's a proposal to have a underwater Internet of Things, which means that everything underwater that is owned by humans will have its own acoustical signature, and it will sound just like that. More noises. I'm looking here at the time, so I maybe I'm not sure how much time you all have. My soapbox is close at hand, but I don't want to take up all your whole evening, and I can play you some lousy sounds all night long.
We run through 9.
Okay, that helps out. So I can do Q&A after about 10 minutes. What I've been working on in the past 2 years, I thought after the Trump administration was done that I'd be able to kind of rest a little bit, and it turns out that that's a great question, Harriet. How do these animals deal with it? We're finding out, and unfortunately, we're finding out the hard way. One of the studies was interesting because we really don't know. We've lob sanded the oceans for a long time. A colleague, Susan Parks, who is with UPenn, has a lab up in Canada. Let's see, where is exactly the lab? I'm doing my senior moment thing. She had been recording the North Atlantic right whale there for forever, since 98 or 99. And there was a situation that happened in 2001, which she with Rosalind Rowland went back and tried to figure out what was going on. But when 9/11 happened, they shut down shipping globally for a little over a week, and Rosalind Rowland was doing cortisol testing on the feces of these animals to find out what the stress levels were. And all of a sudden the noise levels shut down. And so they had a measure of what noise exposure was happening there. It went down from 6 to 10 dB. I mean, like 10 times less, to anywhere from 5 to 10 times quieter than it was. And the stress levels went as well. And then when the shipping started up, the stress levels came up. Well, these animals are barely holding on by their fin tips right now. They're really at risk of extinction. And so, yeah, how do these animals deal with it? I don't know. They can't turn it off. That's one thing for sure. There are some things like, fish will be able to discriminate near field and far field. So you have a fish that lives in an intertidal area, it's going to be noisy there. It's going to waves and crashing and things like that. How do they segregate useful sound from useless sound? Hard to say, but we're seeing the impacts. What's going to be happening with the wind farms on the Atlantic, and I'm going to soon move over to my other wind farm presentation, but they're going to be driving in the Atlantic. They've been driving tons of these piles, literally thousands of piles. They're going to have anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 wind turbines between now and 2035, and each one of them is going to have anywhere from one, if they're monopole, to 4 piles to hold them into place. And every pile is going to be accompanied by this driving sound. So it takes like 4,000 hits to drive a single pile in. And that's going to be going on. They're not just doing it in one place. It's going to be all over the place. And then there's the sound of the wind farms themselves. And we can't really, I'm going to shift over soon to this other presentation here. So what's happening is we're taking what has been open ocean since the beginning of biological time and turning into noise factories. And yeah, this is where I'm gonna, that's my book, by the way. I'll get back to it. Let me see if I can get this other presentation up here. Yeah, there we go. Slideshow from the beginning. So now we're pivoting off of fossil fuel, which is a good thing, but we're pivoting onto wind, which has got its drawbacks to it. And just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, this here is a oh, you're not seeing the new slideshow? No? Okay, let me unshare and share again. And I've also got to get this one here. Screen share, sound on. There we go. On that. Can you see it now? Yeah, good?
Yeah.
Okay,
Looks
good.
like it.
Okay, so this is a 14 kilowatt generator, and this is 150 people that are celebrating their fabrication of this. And this is a blade, which, as you see, oops, down here is pretty large. Ah, dang. Gotta hide this. There we go. And this is the size of these things. They're the size of the Salesforce Tower, the new ones that they're putting in place here. And one of the things that concerned me is that somebody sent me a paper on wind turbine noise as a product of tip vortices, the tip vortices shed. So we know that when helicopters go by, is this going to make a sound for me? Yeah. So that thumping is tip vortices off the blades of the helicopter. And this is an illustration of what happens is it creates this vortice, it collapses and creates a thud. And so these red dots here are the thuds. And it happens at the velocity that we can hear. But when you see a turbine blade going around, and it might take, 5 to 7 seconds to make a complete revolution. Well, things that we don't really understand is that the size of these things, when we have a 300-meter blade sweep, the tip vortices, the tips are traveling at like 200 miles an hour, 250 miles an hour. I mean, they're really moving along, and they're creating the same tip vortices here. They're just too low for us to hear. And this was a paper that this Edwards 2015 paper, they didn't limit the frequency in which they were measuring this stuff. So they're doing essentially, this is 0.1 hertz. And this noise is increasing. So it gets louder, even though their equipment could only go down to 0.1 hertz. This is seismic activity. So it just shows you a lot of energy in that. This is another version of this whole thing. The spikes are basically what happens when the blade intersects the stagnant air in front of the mast. It goes thump, and then the blade tip vortices have their own particular noise to them, which is the rest of this noise that's happening up here. And this is essentially waterbird avoidance of a wind farm up in the North Sea. That's a kilometer. So this is like 100 square kilometers. So we're talking about habitat exclusion of these animals avoiding that. But my big concern is that, birds use barometric cues to understand when storm fronts are coming. So when there's an unstable barometric fluctuation, they don't want to get up in front of it because they don't want to be buffeted by this wacky wind. But when there's a consistent decrease in barometric pressure, they know that a stable storm front is coming in, and they'll get up in front of it, and they can get a tailwind. And that's why little hummingbirds can travel 5,000 miles. The problem is this is the Atlantic flyway, and these animals come from South America, and they're putting 30 different wind farms up there. That is just above the water. Below the water, and that's this is a little math because it was a science conference I was at. Essentially, those low frequencies transmit through the air-water boundary, and we have whales that also use low frequency cues, as I was saying before, either through their own phonations, or they might hear waves on the beaches, or they might hear currents and things like that interact with the geology of the ocean, and that gives them an idea where they're going. If we end up polluting the entire Atlantic seaboard with this low frequency sound, what's going to happen? We don't know yet, and we're going to find out. So there we are. Good. Two things. We can take questions. We have a sound library on ocr.org, and we have a blog as well that talks about, we have like 600 or 700 pieces that talk about noise in the ocean. What I'm also going to do here, I think, let me get off of this. Can I, oh, there we go. I am going to keep the chat going because I want to put out my tin cup thing. We're a nonprofit organization, and we rely on the kindness of strangers. And so I'm going to put a donation link in the chat window here if you feel so inclined. And I'll take any questions that you have if you do, or if you want to just kick me out of the room, I'll do that too.
No, not going to kick you out. If you want to stop sharing, it'll be easier to see everybody.
There we go.
So thank you very much. Incredible presentation. Sounds I never thought I would hear, and particularly my dog never thought she would hear.
How did she handle what was the ones that she was most?
There were some very interesting reactions over here, but the whales started to put her to sleep. The other dog didn't care about any of them. But yeah, I got some very interesting reactions.
Okay, cool.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions aside from what can we do?
Well, what I typically ask people to do is not buy crap from China, you know, transoceanic shipping. So we have a swag campaign we're starting to do. I've always avoided that because, you know, it's always stuff from China that gets repackaged in plastic and sent out. But we found a vendor that is making stuff on this continent here, printing it in the United States and not packaging in plastic. So we're getting closer to that. But I never thought, you know, I never thought I'd be selling swag for a living. Although we have a zillion followers on Facebook, but we're trying to figure out how to monetize it.
Well, if you have does the link include the swag?
Let me oh gosh, I should have gotten the swag thing. Well, you know, you can find the swag on the website, on the ocr.org website. I think we have a market shop thing there.
And on a side note, back channel, I would love to know who that vendor is.
Well, we were working with a group called Title Tees, but she's giving it up now. This is our last month with her, and her stuff was produced in good places, but it still came plastic packaged. So now we're moving over to a company called Ecojoya, ECOJOIA, and they also are environmentally conscientious, and I think they don't package stuff in plastic when they send it out. So
That's amazing. That's
yeah,
hard to find.
it is hard to find. Yeah.
One thing that I'd like to point out is that the bends is from nitrogen in the blood.
Yeah, but there are also other gases. I mean, the oxygen as well. I mean, it's under compression, so that it turned these bodies into, like, as I said, milkshakes inside. It was all the expansion of various gases. The bends is from nitrogen, gets stuck in the joints, and, you know, it really hurts like hell. But these were actually gas emboli that were happening, so it wasn't really the bends per se.
And that was because of the sonar that we put down there?
Yeah, well, they were very deep, and all of a sudden, the Navy sonar put ice picks in their ears, and they bolted for the top as fast as possible because they were terrified. And the terrified thing, I'm working on this project right now. There was what they call an unusual stranding and mortality event in New Jersey that happened in December and January. And I'm reviewing that right now and trying to find out what is the problem, because essentially, and I can tell you what my conclusion is so far, and I have to substantiate it, but they issued 16 incidental harassment authorizations, 16 different separate harassment authorizations. So all the companies that were doing the surveying out there were doing it at the same time. And what the agency should have done is done an environmental impact statement for all 16, because they were running them simultaneously. And these animals, you know, it wasn't like they were doing one and they, you know, the tables that they have, the impact tables, yeah, it might have been accurate-ish for just one survey happening, but when you have 16 surveys or 11 surveys, what was happening at the same time, these animals are freaked. You know, what would happen if all of a sudden, you know, people started throwing bombs in your neighborhood? Mm-hmm. You would freak out. You know, it's not like the next door neighbor who's lighting off firecrackers. It's like all of a sudden everybody's lighting off firecrackers. It's you want to tell them to shut up. Whales can't do that. So I don't know what, we're only speculate as to why they might have lost their vigilance. They might have been hit by boats because they were bolting and you know, who knows? But it was a mess. And what my point is I'm working on is to let the agency know, the National Marine Fisheries Service know, that they were completely irresponsible for issuing these things at the same time to have concurrent surveys occurring. They should have timed them so they at least stretched them out. They didn't do that, so they fucked up royally.
Do you think any of the marine life might try and push back? Because, you know, we've heard about the whales attacking boats up north, but apparently they're playing.
Oh,
Um,
that's in Spain. Yeah, that's off Spain. The orcas there. Pushing back, demonstrating, etc., is not really part of the natural biological vocabulary. You know, it's essentially animals cooperate. They create niches that they inhabit politely, and they, you know, we were talking about the difference between having wolves, or the friend of mine, uh, wolves basically, because they're talking about letting the elks loose out in Point Reyes. It's like, it sounds like a great idea. Let the elks loose, but whenever anybody asks me about it, I said, well, yeah, but we need to actually bring wolves and grizzly bears back, because if they don't have any predators, they're going to just overbreed, and their diseases are going to happen, or whatever. Whereas if there's wolves around, the wolves will take down the diseased animals, and it makes everybody happy. And they're not doing that. And so you know, it's nice to be sentimental about the elks, except for the fact that they're going to be a problem if they let them loose. Nature has a way of dealing with things. There's some universal components of things. One is it's all collaborative and all cooperative. The wolves don't pull down the biggest elk. The hunters will. The hunters want to have that nice rack, so they'll get the most healthy elk and they'll kill them. Whereas the wolves will take the least healthy elk, the elders and the, you know, babies that are not fast enough to run, and take those down. So it ends up being a collaborative effort to essentially cull the weakness out of the herds, whereas humans don't do that. So
And-
the culling thing, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. So
I think Tom and Ellen have a question.
yeah.
There've been, I believe, some speed reductions requested for ships along the Pacific coast, like container ships and tankers and so forth, to avoid whale strikes.
Yeah.
Does the speed of the ships, how does that affect their sound production? And do you think it provides any benefit in the oral environment for the animals?
They're talking about bringing it down to 10 knots. And of course, these guys are not happy with that, because the more time they're spending on the water, the more expensive it is. But the likelihood of a ship strike incurring a mortality at 10 knots is about 80% less than it is at 15 knots. So that's helpful. The noise, of course, is also decreased a lot. The challenge is that the shippers, first, the IMO, I have to give them, the International Maritime Organization, I have to give them credit. They are really concerned about their environmental impact. And so whether it's noise or ship strikes or whatever, they're being helpful. And companies like Maersk, they're actually funding various programs. And we have a program that we're offering up to basically have sensors out there off of Point Reyes to look at the shipping lanes and the interactions between the ships and the whales, and bring the whales up on screen. So these guys in the wheelhouse can see if there's aggregations of whales. Now, the ships are not going to slow down just because there's whales around, but what they can do is they can plan their trip so that as they approach areas where there's large aggregations of whales, they can slow down. That means it would speed up where there's no aggregations of whales, and then they can still meet their dock time. But yeah, that's our Farallon's hydrophone project, and we're submitting to the SBIR right now to see if they can fund that. I think we've got a pretty high likelihood of getting that one.
With all the animals that, you know, you've talked about, sonar location and navigating, all the man-made noises, does that, I'm assuming it interferes with their navigation. Does that affect their migration?
With the wind farms, we're going to find out, and unfortunately, we're going to find out the hard way. I am working. One of the things that I've done over the years is I will look at the environmental impact statements and I'll read through it, critique it, and send out the critique to the agency, and hopefully will inform them to tailor or modify it so as to be able to be a little bit more considerate of wildlife. The problem that we had over the last decade or so is that the large environmental organizations like Ocean Conservancy and whatever were using this public comment period as a proxy for a petition. So they were sending out emails to their millions of followers saying, you know, just use this text and comment on this. And the problem is instead of having, you know, 400 to 600 qualified comments, or some not qualified, but at least a manageable amount of them, they were getting like 2 and 3 million comments on these things. And at that point in time, there's no way that they could spend, you know, if you spend 10 seconds on each comment, it would be 8 years. And so what they were doing is they were doing computer reading, you know, they're basically automating the reading and sorting these things in bins. So all those, you know, 750,000 comments from one particular source would be tallied as one comment because it was the same, they're saying the same thing. But the problem is when my comments came in, which was essentially doing, you know, propagation modeling and kurtosis and other mathematical stuff, because their sorting process did not have those things in the bins, it would just go over their shoulder. They wouldn't read it. So that was painful. And we had decided to get together as environmental groups and collaborate on this. So now I'm in rooms with NRDC and Audubon and Pacific Wildlife and all these other organizations, and we're putting together 100-page critiques on these EISs. But because they're from all these organizations, the agencies have to say, well, we've got to look at this one. And you know, they're well crafted. So that is one of our strategies. The problem is we don't agree on everything. And I finally told these guys, you know, I'm not going to be able to sign on to any critique that leads with we're really thrilled about offshore wind. We need to lead with the fact that we're in trouble and we need to use less energy. Very important. We use so much energy now, and I have some really scary stuff on this, but if we don't use less energy, I was at a county fair a couple of weeks ago in Marin County, and they had a all-electric Lightning class F-150 truck that had 4,000 pounds of batteries in it. Okay, when's the last time you saw, you know, 19 people in an F-150 truck, or even more than one person? So there's more batteries in that than my car weighs, and I've got an electric car. And the F-150 truck is the highest selling vehicle in the United States. So if you have millions of people with 4,000 pounds of batteries each, I mean, just do the math. So.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is a lot.
Does anybody? Oh, Marianne?
And this is just astounding. I was in a Zoom call this morning about, you know, environmental impacts of air travel. And the person being interviewed did a trip around the world without going onto airplanes. And of course, what did they do? They went on freighters. So here we have the, you know, it's
Yeah.
the other end of the day. And now we're hearing about the impact of the ships on the critters in the ocean. You know, we just have to stop being such rabid consumers.
Precisely. I'm going to put a piece up if I can get it here. Oh yeah, it's going slowly. It's a map of the United States and public rail or rail that you can take, and Europe. And you know, Spain has got 3,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, and United States has maybe 180 miles that does not quite working yet. And it takes 20% of the energy to move somebody across the landscape on rail as it does. Okay, here we go. This is very slow, but
Well, while you're bringing that up, Tom had another question.
yeah.
Tom, do you want to read it?
Is there, I guess my question was, is there evidence of the marine animals getting louder in noisier situations, like it's been shown for birds in cities, that they're calling?
There is a bit of that. There's frequency shift and there's some kind of loudness. I tried to get a project funded many years ago but me, I've got these really cool ideas. Essentially, what it was looking at is we have now recordings of humpback whales in various areas, and this was the one I was interested in, was in Hawaii, from 1972 on out. And I thought that maybe the complexity of their codas might have decreased over the course of the increase in noise in the ocean. It would have been an interesting project, but I'm if I was in school still, I probably would have done it, but I'm not in school and I couldn't get it funded. So, but I think, yeah, there's some accommodation, but there's only so much latitude these animals have. Yeah.
Does anybody have any more questions? Well, Michael, thank you very much. It's an informative and fun sounds, an informative presentation.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the opportunity. And who knows, I might bump into you kayaking in Baja California one of these days.
We'll look for you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.